Welcome to Virtual Lunch in the Exhibit Marketers Cafe. I am Marlis Arnold. I am here as always every other Tuesday now this year. My husband Alan is behind the scenes. He's going to help us as always. So welcome to Virtual Lunch. We got a great guest, great conversation coming up today. But as always, I have a few tidbits that I want to share with you ahead of time. So the first couple of links that I want to share with you are kind of fun and different. One you might say is maybe a little creepy, but anyway, but they're technology, how technology is being used. Oh, and by the way, go ahead and just drop your name in the comments, where you're joining us from, all that good stuff. So anyway, but the first link that I want to share is a video, which I highly recommend you go watch. It's just very entertaining. But Pepsi Max did a bus shelter ad in London, and they used augmented reality. And I mean, it's just so clever. And I'm thinking it has a lot of potential for a trade show environment. So it's just you got to watch it. It's just really funny. If you haven't seen this, I mean, there's monsters, there's stuff crashing from the sky. I mean, it's just funny to watch the people's reactions in the bus stop. But just the whole idea of what can you do with AR technology in the exhibit or even in the virtual environment as well. So I see Rama is here from Lev Promotions in San Diego. So welcome, Rama. Marco is here from Italy. Always good to have you join us, Marco. Okay, so that was the first one, the AR. And then the second one is something I just learned about this weekend that they're doing. It's called Deep Nostalgia, and it's a site called My Heritage, and you can take an old black and white photo. And this one's a real long link, but by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, the links are all in the description if you just click show more. And now you'll see they're being put up, even though it looks like it's me, it's Alan posting the links as always. But so it's using AI technology to bring an old black and white photo to life. So it makes it look motion, like it puts the photo in motion, makes it look real. So like you could take your grandmother's photo from the 1920s or something and make it look like it comes to life. So that's where I said it's really cool, but maybe just a little creepy or freaky too. So anyway. So that's the other technology that I wanted to share. A couple of things as far as announcements I want to share. Coming up next week. Oh, I got to get rid of all of this here. Coming up next week online is the Untethered Design-a-Thon. And this is going to be a really interesting conference. Basically, there's going to be what they call circle discussions to engage and innovate and kind of co-create and find solutions together for the industry. There's 9 different topics. And so I'm going to be leading the discussion on the topic, the future of marketing. So, and let's see, Alan put the link up there. So there is the link. You can go to my invitation for Untethered and check out some more details on that. All right. Okay, so that's one announcement. And then the other announcement I wanted to make is that in 2 weeks, we'll have another regular virtual lunch, same time, same place, just like we always do. And then on the 30th, we're going to do a special networking event for virtual lunch. It'll be same time, but we'll be on the AirMeet platform, which if you haven't ever used the AirMeet platform, hold on just a second here. Switching screens here. This is what it looks like. So it's tables. And this is what we used if you were at our holiday virtual lunch that we did. But it's virtual tables. And so you can gather around a table, and then like each table has their own video chat. So you can actually, come on camera, chat with all the people at your table, and just enjoy some conversation with each other. So that's where I thought that would be kind of something fun and different to do. So that is coming up. And I guess I don't have the link for that yet. But anyway, if you don't already follow me on LinkedIn, make sure that you do. And so I'll be putting that invitation up so you can watch for that. All right, let's see. We've got quite a bit of industry news today. So I've got two different links that actually are talking about what's coming up in Vegas, or at least we hope is coming up in Vegas in June. The World of Concrete show has been pushed back, rescheduled, but there's a couple of different links. There's one is a video link and the other one is from the Las Vegas Sun. And as soon as Alan puts those up, I will put them up on the screen. But it's talking about how the Vegas unions are very excited and very encouraged and really, and I've heard a lot of people referencing, and this is like a crazy long link, but I've heard a lot of people referencing that World of Concrete is like the canary in the coal mine, because if that one happens, that's a really good indication that our industry is coming back and we're on the upswing. So, but it's nice to see both with just one of the TV news channels there, and then also the Las Vegas Sun, that there is a lot of just general public, what do I want to say? Just general news that's going out. So we're getting the word out into the general population about the importance of our industry and how important it is for events to come back. Also, New Orleans hosted their first trade show in 320 days. So, and I know that they're not alone, that a lot of cities are in that same boat, but their local news channel also did a bit on the first trade show in almost a year. So that was a big deal. Of course, not every city has good news. Not every city has things coming back. We all know Chicago has had a lot of challenges. And of course, their NBC affiliate did a segment on two major shows that have been canceled for the second year. So that's what's really sad. I think that's what none of us a year ago when all of this started, I don't think any of us ever thought that the shows that canceled last spring would also be canceling again this year. So, it's a real challenge, and there's been a lot of discussion. And on our last episode with Jim Worm, we talked about how, a lot of the shows are really having to try to figure out what they're doing and juggle their plans for this year. So we're hoping, I think that everybody just hopes that it just settles down soon. I think that's been the biggest challenge for all of us, is just not knowing what the end point is going to be. Also kind of following on our conversation that we had with Jim talking about digital health passport. I saw that there's an article in TSNN that they're developing a digital health, or they've developed a digital health passport an app that Fern has partnered with a company called Share My Health. And so they've put together this passport app. So anyway, it's kind of interesting. I wonder how many shows will really, sign on with this. Will it get any traction? Is it a good idea? There's a lot of discussion about that. But anyway, it's an interesting article, and there's also a link from there to go to Fern's website and actually read a little bit more about the whole idea. So, and then I think I saved the best for last. This is a really good, really encouraging article on that trade shows will regain importance. And this comes from Forbes magazine. So this, it's so encouraging to see the traditional, the general public media picking up on this and sharing these kinds of stories. And I believe, if I remember right, that this link was shared by Marco on LinkedIn, I think was where I first saw it. So anyway, so it is encouraging that we've got things happening. There's new things on the horizon. Yes, we're still dealing in virtual. Some have found some good ways to handle virtual. Some have not. As I tell everybody, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. But anyway, so we've got a very great conversation coming up today. I have a special guest here, Ian McGonnigal. And Ian is, he's got a lot to say about experience. And we're going to talk about both the virtual and the face-to-face world today. But I want to give him just a little bit of an introduction first. Ian McGonnigal is a seasoned event and experiential marketing executive who started his career in marketing on the brand side for companies like Bose and GE. On the agency side, he's developed and led strategy practices for agencies, exhibit houses, and production companies such as the George P. Johnson Company, Jack Morton Worldwide, and others ranging in size from 50 employees to well over 1,000. A strategist by trade and client services pro, Ian has served as a trusted advisor for dozens of clients in technology, financial services, manufacturing, CPG, and other industries. His work has won numerous awards, including the Billboard Concert Marketing and Promotions Award. So, Ian, welcome to Virtual Lunch, and thanks for joining the conversation.
Thanks, Marlis. Really appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Well, I think the first thing we need to do in any discussion about brand experience is let's kind of back up a little bit and just define what is brand experience? What are we talking about?
Well, it boils down to really one simple thing, and that's quite frankly how your brand behaves. And I know, for a lot of event and exhibit marketers, we think about brand experience or we think about the word brand. And what immediately comes to mind is what kind of fonts are you using, or what color is your brand, and what's the spacing between the logo and the picture on the graphics you have in your booth. So it's a little bit different than what we typically have considered as brand in the events and exhibit space. It really is how your brand behaves. And it's not just behavior at an event, but it's behavior before, during, after the event, and everything in between, in a way that builds relationships with the audiences that you're really trying to engage and work with.
Well, and that's true. And it can take a lot of different forms too, because I know your article, and Alan's going to put that link up there, where you talked about how to audit your brand experience. Mm-hmm. There were some categories in there that I think most companies or most events don't really think about. So what are some of the aspects? What needs to be measured or evaluated when it comes to brand experience?
Well, like I said, Marlis, it's really everything. And it starts with how your brand is perceived in the marketplace from the first touch. So when you think about how a customer or a consumer or a business, if you're a B2B enterprise, encounters your brand, what are the emotions and the thoughts that they have from that first point, right? Did they observe you working with one of your current customers? Did they see an advertisement in a magazine or on a website or on television, depending on how big your company is?
Yeah.
Did they experience you, as a customer at some earlier point or a different life that they had? So it really starts with that point, and it goes from marketing to sales. So the sales experience is increasingly important to how you're delivering your product, and when they get the product, when they open it, when they implement it in their enterprise, what is that process like? What is the service experience? So if there is a problem, all of those different things play a role.
Well, and I like that you bring in there about the customer service and the relationships, because, I think that's a part, and you and I were talking about this before we started the interview, about how having, building that ongoing relationship is so important. And Ramah says it's so nice to hear someone else with a greater reputation than I have saying what I've been saying for 20 plus years. I agree.
That greater reputation, you're lying.
And I agree, though. It's like, like you said, there's so many other aspects, and it's so important that brand becomes an ongoing relationship. And it's, and it's not just, like you said, it's not just the graphical design. So what are some of the things that event organizers and or exhibitors can do to really develop that brand? I know you've got some great articles that you've written on that as well.
Well, there are all kinds of things that you can do, and first of all, it starts with understanding what your place in the relationship is as an event or an exhibit marketer, right? So understand the inputs and outputs of your. If you're a show producer, if you're a brand, where do you fit in the overall relationship? Is there something that's happened before this event? Are you bringing current customers there? Should you talk to your sales team about everything that these customers have gone through so far, or should you talk to your service team about some of the problems that are happening out there, so you're at least you're aware of what's going on? But from a more tactical perspective, it can be everything from the colors and the fonts and the graphics and everything you use in the booth at the simplest level, to how you lay out the experience. So did you actually make room in your booth for attendees to go into it, right? Or did you fill it with
Yeah.
so much staff and so many pieces of equipment and demonstrations that no one can be comfortable? Or on the other side of that, did you just make your booth into a lounge, and all of a sudden there's no messaging and there's no way to really engage these customers? So there's always that happy medium. And then of course things like sponsorship, and what elements are you taking advantage of, and how are you implementing them? And then if you zoom out a little bit, what events do you go to in the first place, and does it make sense, and what are your objectives, and which audiences are you engaging, and what is the storyline, which is a really, really important piece, right? How are you storytelling at your events, or telling your story in digestible chunks or in chapters over the course of time? Because as we know, no one went to a trade show and bought a multi-million dollar program or product or service based on a sign at that trade show, right? There were a series of touches, multiple people involved in that before, during, and after the event. So you need to understand how that story translates across that continuum of relationship. And, I like to use the example that no one ever got married on the first date. Well, maybe they did, but it probably wasn't a very good relationship. You need to disclose the right information for your customers at the right time in their journey, and only they can define what their journey is. So you don't necessarily want to go really into depth on content on that first date. You want to understand what are their problems or their opportunities, how might you solve them, and start to introduce them. Or if you have an event that's more of a user conference, it's about listening to their ideas and their challenges, and how you can
Hmm.
be a better support company for them and give them those opportunities. So it really is about listening, understanding your audience, understanding your role in the broader relationship, and then of course, how you're going to tell your story in a way that resonates with who they are at the point they are in their relationship with you.
Well, and you just like brought up so many good points that I hope we get to most of them. But
Sorry, I ramble.
no, I mean, it's just like, and anybody who's followed me for any length of time knows that the whole experiential idea is, that's one of my favorite passions of what I love to teach exhibitors. But it's so important to create that experience. The whole just you standing in the booth and waiting to talk to people, that doesn't create an experience. I could think back to shows that I went to, 10, 12 years ago, and somebody did a really, really cool experience in their booth. I could still remember that. I still remember, what they did, how I felt, how cool it was, all that kind of stuff. But that was because they took it to the next level and they created something memorable and something that I, as an attendee, could relate to. And I think that, especially going forward, that is going to be so important, because, a lot of the ways that we've been doing trade shows, it's just, that's not going to work. And of course, the whole experiential thing, you and I were talking earlier, we don't really know what that's going to look like, how interactive we can make things going forward. But let's zero in on the storytelling aspect, because I think that's really cool. And you had a good article on that too.
So as I think about it overall from a storytelling perspective, it's, think about your event and the surround activities like you're telling a story. There should be a protagonist, right? Who is the protagonist? Who's the hero? Is your company the hero? Is your audience the hero? Is somebody else the hero? And then make sure you're thinking about that. Who is the antagonist, right? So who is it? A problem the customer faces? Is it an industry problem? Something we're all facing? Is it the economy? Is it the pandemic? What are we trying to defeat or conquer with the solutions or the products that we're offering to our customers? And then how are we telling that story, right? So what is the plot? right? What is the situation we find ourselves in? What is the marketplace doing? What are competitors doing? And really make sure that that backdrop, comes to life where it's appropriate, and then tell your story in an interesting and meaningful way, right? So, one thing I've noticed about the evolution of trade shows, say over the last 10 years, and we've all, tried to do a really good job of how do we integrate digital into the booth? How do we integrate social media
Mm,
into this? And we don't always think about, are we using technology for technology's sake, or is the technology and the creative
true.
experience we're developing actually additive to the story we're trying to tell? Or is it just something really cool we wanted to do that might not even distract people from the story and the message you're trying to get across and having them engage with you? So it's really not just thinking about what your message is, but how it's laid out. What are the protagonists, the antagonists, and what's the backdrop on which it happens? And then what's the end of the story? What do you foresee the customer or the attendee will want to do at the end of this, and how do you drive them toward that ending in a way that feels comfortable, that allows them that discovery, that allows them to digest your content in a way that's cool and innovative but doesn't distract from the story?
And I love that idea. And I don't know that I've ever really thought, and I was an English major in college, and I don't know that I've ever really thought about designing the booth as far as a story with a protagonist and an antagonist and all those kinds of elements. But that is really clever, because it's true. The more you can tell a story, and thinking back again, a lot of those experiences, like one in particular that I can remember that was years and years ago, was a software company, and they had like a huge island booth, and they had laid it out in a way that you went in. It was the whole thing where you did the velvet rope thing and entered the booth, and then you went to different basically stages within the booth, and so you actually were kind of watching as so here's somebody in an office using the software, and they had a scenario, and so you just witnessed that, and then you went to watch them in the field, and then you went to watch them, and I think there was 3 or 4 different scenarios, but it was very cool. And then of course at the end, this was back in the day when they gave out CD-ROM, so they gave us a CD-ROM with the demo of the software on it, but it was just the whole experience. We got to actually, it was almost Disney-like or something. You got to see how it was interacting in the real world. And so, like I said, that was their way of telling a story and making it very memorable and very experiential. And I think there's a lot more potential for that with a lot of companies, like probably most people would have never thought, oh, software, you can tell a story and make it experiential, but they did a very creative job with it. So what are some examples that you've seen as far as great storytelling in exhibit booth?
Well, I mean, you mentioned Disney, and I'm a big fan of the Imagineers and the good work they do. In fact, what I like about Disney is they get people to pay hundreds of dollars to go stand in line, right? Which, and they're experts at hiding the line. So if you've ever been to Disneyland or even Disney World, you find you're in this weird weaving line that has all kinds of entertaining things during the line. So by the time you get to the experience, you're not as frustrated. And they always deliver on what the promise of the experience is. And when I think about it, it's very sensory, right? So one thing that I
Mhm.
think exhibitors are starting to do is think beyond, audio and visual, right? So we typically experience booths based on, what's on monitors or what the look and feel of the booth is or how it's laid out. We sometimes will think about audio, and I've seen some companies use those sound domes to project audio in certain places, even some using noise canceling. And recently it was probably 5 years ago, they had this whole idea of silent disco come out, where we're starting to use some different and innovative ways to engage audiences. One experience that I was at was a user conference a few years ago that PwC put on, and it was all around the future of work. And what they did was they had
Mm.
5 different scenarios of what the future of work would be for their clients. And in the main stage, they gave sort of an overview of what their white paper was and their thinking was. And then they had a series of vignettes around the room. And in each vignette had a different chapter of what the future of work was, right? One would be much more dystopian and what would happen if capitalist society ruled. Another one would be, much more Star Trek, in that we all got to live together well and we were a very diverse culture and celebrating each other all the time. And they just had all these different vignettes, and each vignette had a different look and feel based on what that future looked like. It also had radio controlled headsets, so you heard the speakers only in those vignettes in the very open setting. And
Hmm.
then at the end of each one of these little presentations that were hosted by actors, which acted out what the future of work looked like. They'd have workshops for the attendees. So the attendees would actually try to solve a problem within that future, within those guardrails and those confines that had been set up. So they were able to
Interesting.
really experience what the future of work was, which was really thought provoking. And every attendee got a chance to go to all of these different areas and see what those different futures were, and how their decision making within those different guardrails would change what that future could become, or would be frustrating in certain features. So it was a really interesting way to do it. So I think that that's one example that comes to mind. But others are doing so many really interesting things. Everything from smell to physical activities. I did some
Hmm.
work years ago with a company that did outdoor experientials. So they started as a billboard company, and then they started doing these wonderful tasks. Like when the James Bond movie came out, they created this entire obstacle course for attendees to run through and be on a spy mission with, which was really kind
Oh,
of fun.
wow.
So they actually lived in the story and were, climbing walls and swimming through dunk tanks and all of that sort of thing. So it
Wow.
could be really, really extreme like that, or it could be as simple as a tunnel. And for IBM years ago, we created a tunnel that told a story. And as you walked through this tunnel to get to the booth, there were different videos and sounds and smells that came about, depending on what solution you were going through. So you were immersed in the entire solution story that IBM brought to their different customers, whether they were customers in technology, or if they were in retail, or if they were in life sciences. It immersed you in those environments as you walked down a tunnel. So you got a full feeling of the breadth and depth of what IBM brought to bear to the marketplace.
And again, that is so awesome because it's multisensory. It's very, you feel like you've been transported somewhere and you're
Mhm.
actually participating in something else. And I think there's going to be a lot of potential for doing things like that in the booths of the future, I guess you could say, even on a no contact level. Because a lot of things we're not going to be able to do maybe that we've done in the past, but a lot of the experiential things that you just mentioned, of like the sounds and the smells and things like that, are going to be totally doable, even if you can't, use a kiosk, a touchpad kiosk or something. I also want to, just because for the podcast we're doing just the interview part, so I want to re-mention the AR experience, and for anybody who might have joined us late, the AR experience video, and I'll have a link in the show notes for the Pepsi Max bus stop, was so cool. I mean, it was just so clever, and I could definitely see that being used in a booth where people can actually see and feel like something's happening that's really not. And I think that's another example of something that people can experience in a whole different way. And with AR and VR technology going forward, I mean, the field is wide open on what can be created there. But the other thing that you talked about that I want to come back to before we wrap up is, how do exhibitors find the right event? What are some of the criteria that they need? Because again, going forward, we may not be exhibiting at all the same events that we have in the past. Budgets have probably been trimmed, and companies have to be more selective. So how does an exhibitor go about choosing where they should be?
That's a really good question. And, it's not really simple, right? I love to say, oh, you want to go to events that do this. It's going to differ based on several different factors. And we talked a little bit about what the customer or the attendee journey is at an event. Well, attendees also go through a journey across different events, right? So you need to think about what is the right type of event, or even if an event is the right tactic to use to engage an audience at whatever stage in the relationship they're at, right? So it needs to be attendee first. And the way I like to think about it is, look at your sales cycle, and you've got everything from awareness to loyalty and advocacy and everything in between. So the best way I can say to figure out what the right events to attend are and to participate in are, is understanding how each of your events aligns to the different stages of that sales cycle. typically trade shows, third-party trade shows, line up to the top end of that sales funnel, right? For awareness, yes, advertising is probably a much more effective tool, but when you get into consideration and preference and getting attendees to really start to have a meaningful conversation with your brand or your company, that's where trade shows play a role. User conferences are obviously toward the end of that. And then in between, you've got everything from small customer meetings to executive briefing centers that you'll want to bring to bear depending on what sort of audience you're hosting and where they are in that journey. And then from looking at trade shows specifically, what you want to look for is first and foremost is going to be, do they have the ability to attract a viable population of your target audience? So very careful about, those lovely metrics that all of them show in their media kits that we attract decision makers. Well, I'm a decision maker. Everybody on this call is a decision maker. You really want to understand who are you trying to target and do they attract that audience? And then the second thing to sort of look at is, do you have the ability to tell your story at the event, right? Are you able to have the right size booth to showcase your products or solutions? Can you do hospitality outside of that? Are the sponsorship packages designed in a way that add value to you? So look for those opportunities to tell a story. And a third thing I'll mention is that the show producer credibility, right? Have they and can they deliver over and over again? Or is this a one-trick pony sort of show that won't be around a year or more from now? So really think about those events that have staying power, that attract a community over and over again.
Well, and that's one of those things right now with the virtual events. We do wonder how many of those are one-trick ponies. And but the other thing that the phrase that I like that you had in that article about choosing the right mix, you said, give every event a job. And I thought that was a really great way of phrasing it. It was like, what is your purpose? Does this event have a purpose? Does it match with what you're doing? So I think there's so much more that we could talk about here. And Savannah says it's so important to give your brand visibility. So, and that's really what we're talking about with creating an experience and doing experiential things. And I just want to put up again, this is one of your article links, but your website is experientialexecutive.com. And I highly recommend people go check that out because, as you've all seen today, he has a number of great articles and I didn't highlight them all. So, but Ian, any final thoughts as we wrap this up?
The one thing I'll say is, take a look at the blog. I'm happy to continue to post articles there. If you follow us on Twitter, Experiential X on Twitter, and I'm always posting stuff that I find, just like Marlis does with some of the cool articles she finds. So that's another source for you to start seeing some of the interesting things out there in the marketplace. But overall, think about your audiences first, always, right? And I think a lot of companies think about their brand first, but you need to start considering who is your audience and what do they want and need at what stage in that relationship. And if you start there with everything that you do, 9 times out of 10, you'll end up in the right place and you'll do it for a lot less money than you think. So always focus on the audience first, and then the rest of it will fall into place.
Great advice. Thank you, Ian. We appreciate so much you joining us for Virtual Lunch. And I want to remind everybody that in 2 weeks, we'll be back with another guest. And then on March 30th, watch for information on our virtual networking experience that we're going to have for our Virtual Lunch audience. So as always, thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to join us here in the cafe. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Great. Bye. Thanks, everybody.